from here. I want to thank Brighton High School for having me on today, and especially the administration and members of BSU for inviting us on a time where we honor what would have been the 90th birthday of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On display in Washington, D.C., in the National Museum of African American History, there's a Bible on loan from Fisk University, the historically Black university in Nashville, Tennessee. The Holy Book is called Parts of the Holy Bible Selected for the Use of the Negro Slaves in the British West India Islands. This tome is more commonly referred to as the Slave Bible. The so-called Slave Bible excludes all of Exodus, in which the Jewish peoples escaped their bondage from Egypt. In fact, about 90% of the Torah, or Old Testament, and 50% of the New Testament are erased from the Slave Bible. For example, its pages include quotes like, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters," from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. But missing is the portion of Paul's letter to the Galatians that reads, "There is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus." As Americans confronting our history with racism, this religious relic compels us to grapple with a timeless question. In our interpretations of history and of historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr., is the end result liberation or domination? Are we whitewashing our history and our historical figures? When I think about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and how his values and efforts influence my life and career today, I first have to reconcile what I learned about Martin Luther King Jr. growing up as a student in Pittsburgh public schools during the 1980s. Then I contrast that with what I understand from reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s own writings and researching for myself his actions during his lifetime. From what I've read of Martin Luther King Jr.'s writings, such as the sentiments expressed in his letter from a Birmingham jail, the perceptions we have of Martin Luther King Jr. as a historical figure are very much shaped by the narrative that best serves those whom our societal systems were designed to benefit. In other words, our institutions are designed to serve those who are in power. The scholar and historian Cornel West talks about the Santa Clausification of Martin Luther King Jr. By that, he means that the establishment embraces the palatable or the non-threatening parts of what Martin Luther King Jr. instructed, but largely erases his radicalism. Just as in the case of the Slave Bible, the appeasing and self-serving teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. are often selectively quoted, while the more scathing criticism that Martin Luther King Jr. reserved for America and its institutions are erased. Hence, we often view Martin Luther King Jr. as a non-controversial figure, a non-violent, non-abrasive man who said, "We should all love one another." However, King's search for racial justice and Black empowerment found him consistently decrying the huge chasm between the lofty rhetoric of American democracy versus, at times, its brutal reality. Martin Luther King Jr. was by no means an establishment figure, as we may be tempted to believe from the larger-than-life legacy that follows him. While today Martin Luther King's polling numbers are generally positive, a far more frequent reaction to the man during his lifetime, aligned with images of rage and scorn. To say that Martin Luther King was reviled by those in power would be an understatement. During his lifetime, Martin Luther King's disapproval ratings hovered at about 65%. It might be tempting to think that the issues of racism that King spoke of are all in the past. After all, we no longer have segregated drinking fountains, and blacks are no longer relegated to the back seats of buses. However, here in Brighton, in over 200 years of government, I am only the second African American to serve on the Brighton Town Board. Likewise, we live in the fifth most segregated community in the nation. A system and a society that is content with that kind of disproportionality is one that is still in dire need of reform. I'm always keenly aware in my current role as a member of Town Board of how the democratic body on which I serve is designed to marginalize certain perspectives and suppress dissent and challenges to certain groups who maintain privilege and power. Fundamentally, the educational, political, and economic systems of the United States, and those here in Brighton, New York, were not designed to advantage people who look like Martin Luther King Jr. And they certainly weren't designed to benefit people who look like me. It's for that reason, in my role on Town Board, I try to speak truth to power for those members of marginalized communities who may not be present at the table. So when I consider my career in public service in the context of Martin Luther King Jr., I'm always cognizant of the voices of dissent. Rather than scorn them, I welcome them as echoes of King. I know that without those voices, we cannot improve upon our democratic systems. King's full-throated support for radical and economic justice can be seen in our own time across the broad continuum of voices, among which I include my own. The radical King's influence, whom I embrace, is best seen in the political actions of a new generation of activists, organizers, and young people like yourselves, who honor his continuing legacy with protests and actions that push the nation closer to the beloved community that King envisioned. King defined that community as not only a world free of racism, war, and poverty. He argued that justice was what love looked like in public, and that all citizens could achieve greatness through a purpose-driven life of service. In my approach to public service, I very much aspire to achieve the example that King offered to all Americans. A life dedicated to the mission of social justice and human rights, representing our ultimate purpose and greatest vocation. So when people call me a radical, I smile. Because were it not for the radicals like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we would be a nation complacent in our inequity.